Identity politics has engulfed the humanities and social sciences on American campuses. Now it is taking over the hard sciences. The STEM fields of science, technology, engineering, and math are under attack for being insufficiently diverse. The pressure to increase the representation of females, blacks, and Hispanics comes from the federal government, university administrators, and scientific societies themselves. That pressure is changing how science is taught and how scientific qualifications are evaluated. The results will be disastrous for scientific innovation and for American competitiveness. A scientist at UCLA reported, "All across the country, the big question now in STEM is, how can we promote more women and minorities by changing, i.e. lowering, the requirements we had previously set for graduate-level study? Mathematical problem-solving is being de-emphasized in favor of more qualitative group projects. The pace of undergraduate physics education is being slowed down so that no one gets left behind." The National Science Foundation, or NSF, a federal agency that funds university research, is consumed by diversity ideology. Progress in science, it argues, requires a diverse STEM workforce. Programs to boost diversity in STEM pour forth from its coffers in wild abundance. The NSF jump-started the implicit bias industry in the 1990s by underwriting the development of the Implicit Association Test, or IAT. The IAT purports to reveal a subject's unconscious biases by measuring the speed with which he associates minority faces with positive or negative words. Since then, the NSF has continued to dump millions of dollars into implicit bias activism. In July 2017, it awarded $1 million to the University of New Hampshire and 2 other institutions to develop a bias awareness intervention tool. Another $2 million that same month went to the Department of Aerospace Engineering at Texas A&M to remediate microaggressions and implicit biases in engineering classrooms. The tortuously named Inclusion Across the Nation of Communities of Learners of Underrepresented Discoverers in Engineering and Science, also known as INCLUDES, bankrolls fundamental research in the science of broadening participation. There is no such science, just an enormous expenditure of resources that ducks the fundamental problems of basic skills and attitudes toward academic achievement. A typical INCLUDES grant from October 2017 directs $300,000 towards increasing Native American math involvement by incorporating indigenous knowledge systems into Navajo Nation math circles. The INCLUDES initiative has already generated its own parasitic endeavor, called Early Concept Grants for Exploratory Research. The purpose of this funding is to evaluate INCLUDES grants and to pressure actual science grantees to incorporate diversity considerations into their research. The ultimate goal of such programs is to change the culture of STEM so that inclusion and equity are at its very core rather than math and science. Somehow, NSF-backed scientists, for decades, managed to rack up more than 200 Nobel Prizes before the agency realized that scientific progress depended on diversity. Somehow, those undiverse scientists discovered the fundamental particles of matter and unlocked the genetics of viruses. Now that academic victimology has established a beachhead at the agency, however, it remains to be seen whether the pace of such breakthroughs will continue. The NSF is conducting a $500,000 study of intersectionality in the STEM fields themselves. Intersectionality refers to the increased oppression allegedly experienced by individuals who can check off several categories of victimhood, being female, black, trans, etc. The NSF studies theory is that such intersectionality lies behind the lack of diversity in STEM. 2 sociologists are polling more than 10,000 scientists and engineers in 9 professional organizations about the social and cultural variables that produce disadvantage and marginalization in scientific workplaces. One of the study's directors is a University of Michigan sociologist specializing in gender and sexuality. Erin Chech has received multiple NSF grants. Her latest publication is called Rugged Meritocrats: The Role of Overt Bias and the Meritocratic Ideology in Trump Supporters' Opposition to Social Justice Efforts. The other lead researcher, Tom Waidzunas, is a sociologist at Temple University. He studies the dynamics of gender and sexuality within science, as well as how scientists come to know and hence constitute sexuality and sexual desire. Obviously, such politically constituted social justice research was not likely envisioned by Congress in 1950 when it created the NSF to promote the progress of science in America. The National Institutes of Health are another diversity-obsessed federal science funder. Medical schools receive NIH training grants to support postdoctoral education for physicians pursuing a research career in such fields as oncology and cardiology. The NIH threatens to yank any training grant when it comes up for renewal if it has not supported a sufficient number of underrepresented minorities, which likely means that in the next 15 to 20 years there will be fewer heart surgeons practicing in the United States of America. The diversity mania also determines the way medical research is now carried out. The NIH has onerous requirements that government-sponsored clinical trials include the same proportion of female and minority patients as is found in the medical school's catchment area. If some of these populations drop out of medical trials at disproportionate rates, which they often do, or are difficult to recruit, too bad. If these URM and female enrollment quotas are not met, the medical school must invest the appropriate effort to correct under-accrual, in the words of the NIH guidelines. That appropriate effort costs tens of millions of dollars. Schools such as the Mayo Clinic, located in overwhelmingly white areas, must still meet a diversity quota. If a particular immigrant group in a research trial's catchment area contains a disproportionate share of young people compared with the aging white population, cancer and heart disease drug researchers must recruit from that community in numbers proportionate to the share of its overall population. Furthermore, STEM departments are creating their own internal diversity enforcers. The engineering school at UCLA minted its first Associate Dean of Diversity and Inclusion in 2017, despite already being subject to enormous pressures from UCLA's fantastically remunerated Vice Chancellor for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. Meanwhile, the science diversity charade wastes extraordinary amounts of time and money that could be going into basic research and its real-world application. If that were its only consequence, the cost would be high enough. But identity politics is now altering the standards for scientific competence and the way future scientists are trained. Diversity is now an explicit job qualification in all STEM fields. The University of California at San Diego Physics Department advertised an assistant professor position several years ago with a specific emphasis on contributions to diversity. Social justice concerns apparently trumped the quest to solve the mystery of dark energy. The 5 final candidates on the UC San Diego shortlist were females, leading one male candidate with a specialty in extragalactic physics to wonder why the school had even solicited applications from Asian and white men. Even more alarming, a network of so-called teaching and learning centers at universities across the country are seeking to make science classrooms more inclusive by changing the pedagogy and expectations for student learning. The STEM faculty is too white, male, and heteronormative according to these centers, making it hard for females, blacks, Hispanics, and the LGBTQ population to learn. Lecturing and objective examinations should be de-emphasized in favor of culturally sensitive pedagogies that pay close attention to students' social identities. This, they suggested, was just as important as finding a cure for cancer. This subcategory of progressive pedagogy has long embraced the idea that students should work exclusively in groups as a way to model collectivist democracy. This political agenda is simply a pretext for masking individual differences in achievement that might reinforce group stereotypes. Students showed a positive shift in believing that they were good at science. Scientific self-esteem is now the academic goal. The extraordinary accomplishments of Western science were achieved without regard to the complexions of its creators. Now, however, funders, industry leaders, and academic administrators maintain that scientific progress will stall unless we pay close attention to racial identity and to try to engineer proportional representations in school and laboratory. The truth is the exact opposite. Lowering standards and diverting scientific energy into combating phantom sexism and racism is reckless in a highly competitive, ruthless, and unforgiving global marketplace. Driven by unapologetic meritocracy, China is now beating the US and Germany. Identity politics in Western science is a political self-indulgence that not only we cannot afford, but is a grim example of how a Marxist liberal elite are deliberately driving Western civilization over a cliff and into a new collectivist dark age.